So let's say I have this user object, then location, street, then street, uh, uh, so suppose this is a user object and it contains all of these properties. And the location property is optional, so it might not be present. So right now this is present. So if I want to access this, let's say I want to print the street. So what I can do is user.location.street. And I can print that street. You can see New York is printed. So this is fine because this location exists, but this location is optional. It might not exist. So in profile, user might not have city state filled in. So in that case, this will be empty. Like it will not be there whenever user enters. So it will have only name and age property. So right now what is happening? You are accessing user.location.street. So location itself does not exist. So this is undefined. So this will give you undefined. And you are accessing properties of undefined. So you will get a JavaScript error. You can see cannot read properties of undefined reading straight. So it's trying to read street value, but this itself is undefined. So you are getting cannot read properties of undefined. Avoid that. What we do normally do is we first check if user exists, then do check again if user dot location exists, and then go for here. So what happens is this AND operator, if something is false, so immediately it will return. So if I say this is a true and let's say hi, so you immediately you get that high value. You don't get true or false. So that is important in JavaScript. When you use AND operator, you get the value, last value you are using. So instead of hi, now again I have hello. So you get the last value, last truthy value you get until something is true. But let's say the first itself is false. So the next code will not be checked. It will stop immediately, and whatever the false value you are having, that will be returned immediately. So your next code will not be executed. So that's the advantage. So this user exists, then user.location is undefined. So your next code will not be executed and you will never get error. So you can see undefined is printed because when you don't have anything, this will return undefined. So this is false or undefined. As I said, if this is false, we will get immediate false. If this is instead of false, it's undefined, you get undefined return. If you have 0 here, you will get 0 back because this is a truthy value. So AND operator checks if something is true or false. So there are only how many 6 or 7 falsy value in JavaScript. So if I search for falsy values in JavaScript, MDN, you can go here. You can see null, undefined, false, not a number, 0, -0. This is big 0, big int, then empty string. All these are falsy values in JavaScript. So in JavaScript, only these are falsy values. If you use anything else, that is truthy value. So even if I use array, empty array, that is truthy, it's not false. Even this particular value is not in this list of 8 values. So only if it's part of these 8 values, that will be considered as falsy value. But it's not part of that, so this is a truthy value. So when something is truthy, next value will be checked. This is truthy, then again next value will be checked. So until you have truthy value, it will keep JavaScript keep checking and you will get that value. So if I use instead of this not a number, this is a falsy value. So immediately whatever you have, that will be returned. Similarly here, what we are doing, we are using user here checking. User exists, yes, it's truthy value. User dot location exists, no, location does not exist. So this will give you undefined. So you will immediately return undefined. This code will not exist. So now street will contain just undefined value. So this is the older way of checking if something exists. You have to add lot more nesting. So if in location, let's say there is another property, state, state is also nested property. Again, something state name, New York, like this. So if I want to access state name, so what I have to do, I have to use user dot location dot street dot state, and again I need to check it here dot name. So you can see first I need to check if user exists, then user dot location exists, then street exists, then state exists, and then finally get. If I don't check for state, I directly use state dot name, and this step does not exist. So what will happen? Location dot street will be, street is there, so this will be state, not street. This will be state location dot state dot name. Yeah. So here user dot location dot state does not exist. So this will immediately be undefined, and you will not check this particular value. So this is how you need to check each particular property. You need to check if it exists or not. But if I directly try to access this, you will get error, because even though location exists, state does not exist, and you are accessing name property. You can see reading name cannot read properties of undefined. So to avoid this issue, you always need to check all those previous property, and then here you are getting undefined because it does not exist. But if I add this, you will get that name property, New York. You can see London, whatever you value add, all these values will be printed. So you have to add all of this code, extra code every time, depending on how much nesting you have. So to avoid that, ES11 added optional chaining operator. So what it does is, instead of checking all of these properties, now you can write it like this. So this is the state equal to, now you can directly use the name property. So user dot location dot state dot name, but instead of directly using, you add a question mark here, question mark dot. So question mark dot is optional chaining operator. Both together are called as optional chain. So everywhere you add a question mark. So this is heavy, like if this is ES11 operator. So if your browser need to convert, or webpack or whatever bundling tool you are using, that need to convert it into ES5 code. So use optional chaining only if required. So you know that user will always exist. So you don't need to add a question mark here. So user exists. So if you are adding something on this, it will be there. So even if it does not exist, so user exists, but all these properties are not there. So what will return? It will print user dot location will be undefined. So even if I don't add this, and if I print state, you will get undefined back. So if user exists but something, another property does not exist, you will get undefined. That is not error. But something is undefined and you are trying to access that, then you will get error. So to avoid that, if you know user will always be there, you don't need to add this question mark here. Add it only for location. Location is optional, so it might exist or does not exist. So add question mark. So here it will be state, again question mark dot, again name. So now state, right now it's undefined. So when something is undefined, you will get undefined as the result. So optional chaining operator returns undefined if it's not able to find that particular property. But if I have all those properties, you will get that name, state dot name London printed. You can see London is printed here. So here optional chaining is important till the last whenever you are accessing, so you know that this will not, this might not exist. So here you can see state dot name. Right now everything exists, so you have added question mark here, that's fine. State exists, so that there is no issue, you will get London here. But if state does not exist, what you are doing, you are adding optional chaining only till here. So if location does not exist, next code will not execute, but it exists, so now it will check for state. State exists, no, and you are not using optional chaining, so right now you will get an error. You can see cannot read properties of undo. So you, whenever you are using nested properties, always add question mark, so you will not get that error until, so you will get undefined back and your program will not stop. So whenever you have some JavaScript error, your next code will not execute. So next lines of code will not execute if there is some error. So you should always try to think if something is breaking or it might not exist. In that think in that way, and you need to write the code in that particular way. So you don't add unnecessary question mark, because it will add extra code to support the to convert it into ES5 code. So whenever, even if you are using React app or any app, any library or framework, you need to remember that don't unnecessarily add question mark, because browser has to add that extra code to support the previous version to convert all this ES6 to ES5. So user will exist, you know that it will, even if it's an empty object, it will still be there. So you don't need to add it here. Only add if you think that will not exist. So initially it might happen that user is null. So in that case, it's required, you need to add this. So because if I don't add, you can see cannot read properties of null. So when you are assigning objects, so let's say you have used state hook, use state, and you want to store object inside it. So normally we define initial value here, but if you don't have initial value for objects, you can assign null also as initial value. So we don't assign null for array, so we assign null for only object. So if you don't want to mention it as an empty object, or you don't want to assign initial values, so in that case you can assign null. But when you assign null, you need to remember that you check that null everywhere. So here you can check user.location. So instead of here, you need to add that question mark. So right now you are getting error. This is something else. So user, you can see user is null. So you can, let me remove. So user is null, you can see you are getting cannot read properties of null reading location. So it's trying to read location, but user itself is not. So in that case, you add a question mark here. Now what will happen? User is null. So it will immediately return that particular value as undefined. So optional chaining will not return whatever falsy value. It will always return undefined. With this AND operator, you will get that whatever value you are returning. So if I return false, you will get false back. If I return 0, you will get 0 back. But with optional chaining, you will always get undefined as the result. So this is important. You always need to add question mark whenever you think something might not exist. Let me bring everything back. Optional chaining is used to whenever you are accessing nested object property. So this is nested. This is not only used for objects, it can be used for array or function also. But whenever you are accessing something which is nested property, in that case you use optional chaining. When you think that something might not exist, so in that case you use this optional chaining. So this is not only for this object, you can also check. So if you have some function, so display function, so display function might be there or might not be there. So in that case, you can just add display question mark dot and. So now this display function display is not defined. Oh, it's coming. Display Yeah, display itself is not there. So let's say user. I have user dot display. So now you can see undefined. So user exists. Display, when you access something in JavaScript that does not exist, you will immediately get error. So when I try to print person, you will get error. Person is not found. So what was the issue previously? I was trying to see display, but display itself don't know. JavaScript don't know what is display because you have not declared that. That's why it was giving error. But when I see say user dot display, now user exists, this property exists, but that particular object display function does not exist. So if I call this without this operator, you can see you are getting error. User dot display is not a function. But if you know that that might not exist, so you can add just question mark dot here. So that will be like optional thing. So it will check if display exists, then only it will call that function. You can see you will not get that particular error. So you can add optional chaining for properties, nested properties, and you can also add it for making function calls. So that is also possible. And it's also used for array. So now when I print names, you will get that object. So each array, this array contains two objects. Now I want to print zeroth element. So zeroth element is this. So it will print the first object with name Mike. You can see it's printed. Now I want to access the name property. Names of zero dot name. So it will print that Mike here. But let's say some of them have age property, some of them don't have age property. So first, when I try to access age, you will get that value. So let's say here I also have location, city, New York. So now I want to access names of zero dot location. This will print this object, which is the actual location. So city also exists, so I will get that city value New York printed. You can say it's printed, but for this is only present for first object. For a second user, these properties are not present. So these are optional properties. Suppose so, if I access one, names of one, so names of one exist, but location does not exist. So here, if you directly access this, you will get undefined. That is not an error. You can see you get undefined. But when I try to access city location itself does not exist here. You are accessing city, so you will get an error here. You can see cannot get. So in this case also, you can add question mark here, location dot city. So you know that location will exist. So suppose and it can be null or it can be empty object. So you add the, but city is not sure. So it can be empty or location can be null. So in that case, you add question mark only for the after location. Location is there, but city does not exist. You add question mark here, but you know that location does not exist. So you can add question mark here also. So now it will only check names of one. So you can see you get undefined, but you know that second element might not also exist. So instead of names, we can call it users. We have list of users, so only there is one user. I only have one user. So you don't have users of one. So this is users of zero. So now you try to access, let's say users of one dot location dot city, you get error. Location, it's not able to see the location, read the location. So I add this, you get undefined. And suppose users itself does not exist. It's null or empty array. So one will work, but if I make it, don't initialize it. This is const, so I have to initialize. But if I make it let, you can see cannot read properties of undefined reading one. So this is also common error. So you are trying to read first index element, but users itself does not exist. So in that case, you can add question mark here, question mark dot. So question mark, this optional chaining, when you add, you will not get error, you will get undefined. So you can add this question mark for nested properties while calling function. You can also add while accessing index of particular array. That is also valid. So this is how you can use ES6 optional chaining operator to save your some time, but don't make it like, don't add it everywhere. You have to think if something will exist or not. So because it adds some extra code, so your final application bundle size will increase. So to avoid that, always try to use question mark whenever required. So that's it about optional chaining.